All right. Buenas noches. Thank you very much for having me. I will be sharing my screen with you. I hope everybody can hear me well. I'm going to speak with you today. Quite difficult after Anita and David's knowledge and putting the barrier that high. I'm going to speak today about one of my favorite topics in the context of blockchain, which is mass adoption. I've been introduced already, so I'm not going to bore you with that. Maybe just to mention, I've been in the blockchain space since 2013 when I built one of the first blockchain companies in Switzerland, and I've been a fan of the space and involved in the space ever since. So I've been following pretty much and active in the space since Bitcoin was priced at 3 digits, for those of you who remember, and it's been quite a ride. Now, what we're seeing and what we've been experiencing over the last many years since Bitcoin and blockchain started taking interest and taking main stage is what cannot be called other than hockey stick madness. We've been hearing, especially we had it in the time of the ICOs, but we are experiencing it now through other applications in DeFi, like David very well explained to us, what I call promises of Lambo to the moon. Many of you have heard that term. We see one bull run after the other. There is an increasing amount of investment in blockchain. There is an increasing amount of startups, of coins, never mind what you name it. Now, something that I observed, and which is quite staggering, is the gigantic disconnection between the amount of talk about blockchain and cryptocurrencies and the actual amount of people and the actual amount of active users in the space. Currently, think about it, 0.5% of the world population, so 1 in 200 humans are currently what we call in the space, or actively trading or working or doing something that has to do with blockchain, with cryptocurrencies, and so on and so forth. So in other words, probably, and I've mentioned this before, I like to compare blockchain and cryptocurrencies with teenage sex, which is something that everybody talks about when you're a teenager. However, very few people really know what they're talking about. And there is still a long way to go. So we are very far, if we think about these numbers, from what would be called mass adoption. Now, what is stopping mass adoption? Thank you so much earlier for taking the poll. Something that we saw in the poll, for example, was regulation, something that's very often discussed. Thanks for bringing it up. Education. Half of you think that one of the main reasons has to do with education. And yes, education compared to knowledge certainly is an important barrier. Reputation. There is still, from the early days of Silk Road and the scams stories we've heard around the ICO space, there is still a lot of challenges when it comes to reputation. Regulation is one of the topics that's always or is constantly mentioned. Yeah, overall, there are many reasons why you are what you're seeing, and all of those are correct. However, I'd like to point the interest to what I called something that you probably won't think, what I think are some of the key barriers to mass adoption. And today I'd like to share with you mostly 3 different aspects. On the one side, I'd like to give you a different view, a different perspective on what is hindering blockchain to reach mass adoption. Some elements that you might or might not have thought about, but I'd like to guide your thinking into that direction. And for those of you who are involved in this space, I'd also like to share some of the typical mistakes that projects, companies, startups, most of the time startups that are involved in this space, mistakes that they do when it comes to making their projects or their applications or their initiatives successful. And I'd like to give 2 or 3 tips about things on how you could do that better. In our company, the Relevance House, we work daily and constantly with projects in this space, and we experience a lot of these on a daily basis. So I'd like to share a little bit of that with you. But the most important message to me would be to frame the real hindrance of blockchain mass adoption. Everybody talks about regulation, talks about safety, education, and yes, all of those, as mentioned, are important. However, what to me is most staggering, the potential of blockchain to bring value to many industries has very little to do, oftentimes, with regulatory safety. It actually has to do with the way I like to put it, four key things. One of them is the fact that the technology doesn't say what it does, what it says on the tin, if you're familiar with this expression. I call this the dilemma beyond the trilemma. There is a disconnect between the promises of blockchain and the reality of blockchain. The technology that we all speak about actually is not capable of doing or transforming the world to the extent we would like it to do. So simply put, what we need is a better blockchain technology. Now, there are two types of blockchains, as most of you, or at least people refer to two types of blockchain. Public blockchains, they're not able to deliver on their promise. We've all heard about the famous trilemma of speed, scalability, and cost, and that remains. And in order for example, for running the entire payment system of a Visa or MasterCard, you would need 25,000 transactions per second. So the amount of volume and the amount of capability that this technology would have to do to carry the world of the economy on its shoulders is simply not there currently. It's just not possible. So one of the main limitations is actually the technology itself. Now, the other type of blockchains that are oftentimes referred to as an alternative, private blockchains, mostly the most famous one, Hyperledger. In my personal view, these are simply not blockchains. They totally ignore one of the main principles of blockchains, which is decentralization, and therefore, simply, you know, in my point of view, they're just an overcomplicated ledger or a gigantic database. Now, the main challenge in the context of blockchain, in my view, though, when it comes to the technology, is actually one level deeper, which is in the consensus protocols. There are the three most typical used consensus protocols are proof of stake, proof of work, and proof of authority. Now, when blockchain was initiated, was created, the idea of it was to decentralize, to basically distribute the power around the world. Democratization, inclusion, those were some of the elements that were behind it. And the challenge of proof of stake, proof of work, and proof of authority, the way, especially the way it is evolving, is that ultimately they are being concentrated. They are based on one factor, ultimately, which is power. So of proof of work, you have gigantic mining operations that actually are concentrating power, and therefore they are not living the decentralization thinking that was supposed to be behind the entire blockchain movement. So that is indeed the challenge. Now, when it comes to the technology and when it comes to the protocol, but the main real barrier to mass adoption, in my personal view, is that what we have done is we have created a new fancy planet, which is what I call the illusion of planet Krypton. Now, most of the conversation, most of the focus, most of the energy when people refer to blockchain has got to do with cryptocurrencies. The price of Bitcoin is what everybody is obsessed about. However, there are three key elements that are standing behind blockchain. And yes, I do not believe that Bitcoin is a bubble, personally. Yes, I am a hodler, and I believe in the power of it too. But there are three key aspects of blockchain, at least in my view. What I call the blockchain economy, which is, yes, where cryptocurrencies are at the center. So basically looking at cryptocurrencies as an asset. Then the blockchain technology, which is blockchain as a decentralized technology with the potential to transform the world. And there is an interesting aspect behind too that we often forget. And all these three were part of Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper that Anita very eloquently described to us earlier, which is what I call the blockchain mindset. So decentralization, the empowering and distribution of power. That is what I call the real trilemma. Now, what we do tend to do is we focus very much on the whole blockchain as an asset, so Bitcoin and Ether and the price and the blockchain economy. And we've created this planet that is outside of our entire world and where assets are moving from one place to the other. And the key driver is the price of cryptocurrencies and the idea of eventually making money with them. But that is only one of the elements of blockchain, of the true understanding, in my point of view, of blockchain. So now a mistake around this is the challenge of David against Goliath. To some extent, we are kind of generating the impression that the world is wrong and that everybody will move to planet crypto, and that it's the big revolution of the small, non-powerful person against the gigantic. And we see it in the chart from David, for example, the banks, the investment banks, the establishment, and so on and so forth. Now, in my personal view, one of the barriers of mass adoption is particularly that thinking, because in order for blockchain to change the world, it needs to take place in the world. So as long as we continue building a planet outside of Earth and, planet Krypton, that I call it, and try to fight against the establishment here, as opposed to try to bring it and embed it into the existing world and change it from here, we will not succeed. So that is another barrier for mass adoption. And last but not least, something that happens all the time is there is far too much focus on talking about technology. To a certain extent, we are talking to ourselves. I'm a technology fan myself. I am not a cryptographer. I don't have a PhD in computer science. I have a quite acceptable understanding of the technology behind, but the amount of tech talk that's going on in the world of blockchain is overwhelming for most people. I always say that nobody knows how, or very few people in the world know how the Google algorithm works, but everybody uses Google every single day. Actually, I dare to say that a lot of people in the world wouldn't even know how to spell the word algorithm correctly. And still, we use Google every single day. So we don't need to understand how blockchain technology works in order to use it, right? The day we stop trying to talk about the technology and start using it, then we're going to reach mass adoption. Now, in this context, a few typical mistakes that blockchain projects, blockchain initiatives, and so on, and in our experience do when trying to basically become adopted and gain adoption. The first one is the thinking that we do not need a business strategy. And I always say there is a massive difference between a minimum viable product, which is based on technology, and a minimum viable business. So you do need a business strategy. You do need to focus on more than just the technology. What you just have is amazing tech, well, good for you, but you're not going to be able to change the world and reach adoption. You're going to need target groups. You're going to need consumers, or users. You're going to need customers. You're going to need, and that is something that goes beyond the technology. And I see this all the time. All the efforts put behind the technology, very little effort put behind actually getting it out, getting it used, getting it well known. And this is very closely correlated to this idea of we have an awesome product, so we're going to build it and people will come. And that is a recipe for failure, right? No matter how good your product is, the world is full of case studies of products that were technically superior and still failed. Just building an amazing product is no guarantee for success. And then it comes to a certain point in time when you just decide, well, you know what's going to happen, right? It's all going to be viral marketing and PR and social media. Everybody's going to talk about us, and that's how we're going to do it. It's going to all be super successful. Or you actually manage to raise some funds, and then you go and yes, we're going to advertise the shit out of people. That's how we're going to reach adoption for our project. And that is not a success recipe. And then the typical aspect of, let's go and let's be everywhere. Let's be on every channel that exists. And most importantly, once we are everywhere, let's talk about us. Let's talk only about us, about our technology, and about how great we are. That is not how you're going to get your product, get your project, and get your initiative or your DApp or your coin, your startup, your whatever, your vision to become famous. And the point is that people just don't fucking get it. It's really, really challenging for people to understand the importance of doing all these things right, and that there are no particular new super rules that operate in the planet Krypton at the end of the day. So, how do we get into the right mindset to reach mass adoption? And it's really a matter of mindset. Something I like to say is that outside of your family and friends, with all due respect, nobody gives a fuck about how great you are. Your mother always will love you, but the rest of the world will have to be convinced. And they will be convinced if you manage to convince people about the relevance of what it is that you do. And here comes an important sentence in this context. Blockchain technology is not going to change the world. What we do with the technology will. At least that's what I believe. I believe that blockchain technology has the potential to change the world, but only if we focus on what we can do with it. So answering the question, what does the world need my shit? And sorry for my French. So ask yourself, how relevant is your offering, your solution, your idea, your vision really? Right? Now, how relevant is it? It's all about relevance, right? In order for something to be relevant, first we need to get the blockchain discussion of what I call respectfully the geek nerd seller, right? Stop the technology discussion and focus on building credibility. Some of you mentioned correctly, there is a challenge with reputation. We need to work on the credibility behind the power of this technology and its application. Visibility, we need more people to get and hear around it. And most importantly, value, right? What is in it for me? Why should I use your technology? And just because you have developed the Airbnb but on the blockchain, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is relevant, because why is it better? So another mistake that many of these operations and companies and brands and projects do when they're trying to reach adoption is actually, even if they have a business strategy, which many even don't have, it's just like, boom, they dump their business strategy on the target audience. So the world operates still. Human beings operate still like they've always done. So people buy, you sell a product, but people buy a brand. And brand is a promise in a story. So don't talk to me about your technology. Tell me a story that I can embrace and that I will understand. And when you do so, please keep in mind one more thing. Every good idea fits on a post-it. And if it doesn't, it's not a good idea yet. It's a sentence we've been saying for a long time. Elevator pitches are dead because elevator rides are too long. If I need 25 minutes to understand what it is that you do and why it is better and everything else, I am just going to be gone, right? So make it simple, right? Write it down in a tweet. If you can't express in 280 characters why the world needs whatever it is you're building and why it's better, then it's gonna fail. And now, other than that, we need to change the world. In order to change the world, we need to disrupt existing established players. So we need to become professional and really operate in the professional world. And as we said, we need blockchain on planet Earth. So we need to fish where the fish are. We need to stop trying to convince everybody to come over on the hopes of speculative price increases, because that is a one-sided and very short, not necessarily short-sighted, but it's a one-dimensional thinking and has nothing to do with what mass adoption will represent. And last but not least, making sure that we try to build something on the long term. It's a marathon and it's not a sprint. And this is one of the challenges that we encounter. People come into and are interested in projects, or buy and then sell, and they are out and they are not interested in really changing the world through it. So in closure, basically, what in order for blockchain to reach mass adoption, at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves one question. Are we creating a new asset class in order to make money, which is the blockchain economy and cryptocurrencies? Nothing against that. Nothing against that. Not going to reach mass adoption. It's just going to become an asset class. And it's just going to become part of the economy. And people are going to invest in it. They're going to make money. Some others will lose money. And that will just become the blockchain economy or the crypto economy. Or are we trying to leverage a new, very powerful technology to make the world more transparent, more inclusive, more trusted, more democratic? Because that's the potential of the technology. And that's ultimately something that had to do with the original idea of Satoshi Nakamoto. So if we do, we need to shift the focus from the economy to the technology and the mindset, or at least enlarge it, because that will reach the blockchain mass adoption, and that will give us the possibility of changing the world. If not, a lot of people are going to make a lot of money, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, and the world will stay the same. Thank you very much for listening.